Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
My wife and I had been renting a tiny apartment for years, saving every penny we could for our first home. We've been looking for over a year when we finally found our dream house in early 2021. It was perfect timing with the market, and we managed to snag a new build in an older neighborhood. The house itself was brand new, but it sat on what used to be just an empty lot covered in overgrown trees and bushes. When we moved in, the backyard was a complete mess. The previous owners had let about 100 feet of land just grow wild. Vines, bushes, small trees, bamboo, you name it. It was back there. Our property was shaped weird too, like a parallelogram instead of a normal rectangle, so the yard was angled in a strange way. My wife and I spent weekends working hard to clear everything out. It was exhausting work, but we were so excited to finally have our own place. After weeks of cutting and hauling, we discovered we actually had about 25 more feet of usable backyard than we thought. We started in the center and worked our way out to the sides. When we got to the left side, we found our survey stake and stopped there like we were supposed to. Then we started working on the right side. After a few days of clearing, we came outside one morning to find the strangest thing. Our neighbor had put up what I can only call a patchwork fence. It was just tree limbs and random sticks stabbed into the ground. We still had a good 15 feet to go before we'd reach our property stake, but since we hadn't met these neighbors yet and winter was coming, we decided to stop there. We didn't want to cause any problems. A few months passed and spring came around. The makeshift fence had fallen down over the winter and the limbs were scattered everywhere. I started mowing my lawn, going from my front stake diagonally back to where I could see my back stake through the remaining overgrowth. I spent a whole day cutting through the brush and made a huge pile in the back. The next day, a company came out and hauled away 4 truckloads of brush. The following week, I went to cut the grass again and saw something unbelievable. Someone had laid rocks and sticks way into my yard, about halfway down from where I've been working. The line went all the way back to where that original patchwork fence had been. I was confused about why my neighbor would put them on my property. I decided to do some research. I pulled out the survey we got when the house was being built and started walking our property lines. I measured from our front marker to our back marker. It matched perfectly. Then I measured between the back left marker and the back right marker, also perfect. Our survey said 115 feet between the pins, and when I used both a long tape measure and a walking measuring tool, I got within 3 feet of 115. I knew I was right. I should mention that I'd tried introducing myself to these neighbors before. The husband seemed quiet but nice enough, but his wife completely ignored us. No waves, no smiles, nothing. It was pretty rude. So I moved all the rocks to the back of my yard and threw the sticks in the yard waste bin. I finished cutting the grass and started spraying the little root systems from all the brush I'd removed. That's when the male neighbor came outside and walked toward me. He told me that I had removed their privacy plants that helped hide them from the people behind us. He said he wasn't sure if I thought my yard went that far, but all of that area was actually their yard. I explained to him that our survey showed the distance between the back pins should be 115 feet, which matched what I measured. I also told him that the measurements from front to back matched up too, so everything lined up with our survey. He said his wife worked for the city and could see exactly where all the property lines were. He pointed about 15 feet into what I knew was my yard and claimed his property went all the way over there. I offered that we could split the cost of getting a new survey done if he wanted to be sure, but he wasn't interested and just went back inside. I kept working in my yard, and 2 weeks passed. When I went to cut the grass again, there were now bricks, rocks, more limbs, yard spray paint, and flags 15 feet into my yard. I was really irritated now. I knocked on their door but got no answer, even though I could see both of them through the window. I'd also noticed they were watching me on their doorbell camera when I was cutting grass. They were definitely home but choosing to ignore me. I moved what I could and finished cutting the grass. Then I went to the hardware store and bought some string. I ran it from my front stake to my back stake to mark my property line clearly. The next week, the string was cut and lying in my yard. When I saw the husband getting into his car that evening, I approached him. I asked him why they had cut my string. He claimed his mower must have run over it. I pointed out that it was strange his mower ran over it and the string ended up in my yard, right where he said my property ended. I told him my survey was new and more likely to be accurate than whatever system his wife was using to figure out property lines. He said if I was so sure, then I would have to pay to get a new survey done myself. I told him that was fine, I would do exactly that. I got several quotes for a new survey. The prices were all over the place. The lowest was $550 from the company who did the original survey, another was $980, and the highest was $4,400. I wasn't sure why there was such a huge difference for the same work, but I went with the $550 option since they'd done it before. The surveyors came out and put up 15 stakes along that side of my property line. But here's what really shocked me. I was wrong about where my property ended. It actually went further into their yard by up to 4 feet in some places. The surveyor explained that there used to be an old rock wall between our houses that was mostly on my neighbor's property, but partly on the empty lot where my house was built. My neighbor didn't want to deal with tearing down and rebuilding parts of it, so the builder paid him for the land the rock wall was on plus about a foot into their yard, then removed the wall entirely. I was worried my neighbors might mess with the new stakes, so I bought some outdoor cameras and pointed them at my property line. We went on vacation, and when we came back, sure enough, all the stakes were gone. I left another note explaining that removing survey stakes was illegal and that we needed to talk. I included my phone number. When I checked the video footage, I saw the neighbor's wife removing every single stake. I didn't hear anything for a few days, so I ended up talking to the husband while he was about to go for a run. He claimed he never got my note and didn't know anything about any stakes. I told him I had his wife on video removing the stakes. He said he would talk to her about it. That night, I got a text apologizing and promising they wouldn't remove the stakes again. But wait, how did he get my number to text me if he never got my note that had my number on it? I texted back that he wouldn't just avoid removing stakes again, but that he would also be paying for another survey. He replied that they didn't know it was done by an actual surveyor. I told him it didn't matter whether they knew or not. We went back and forth over text before he eventually agreed, after I threatened to involve the police and take him to small claims court. I called the original surveyors to schedule another survey, but they refused. They said they didn't want to do a job that had potential criminal implications like this, so they wouldn't do it again. I called the next lowest quote I'd gotten. They said they could do it for $900 now. I told them I'd get back to them and let my neighbor know the cost. He was furious when I told him the price. He said there was no way that was right and that a survey didn't cost that much. I told him he was free to get his own quote and gave him the names of 5 companies I had tried. A week passed and I asked him what his cheapest quote was. He admitted it was the $900, but said he wasn't going to pay it. I told him that was fine, he could pay the $500 fine, get a misdemeanor charge, and we'd go to small claims court where he'd still end up owing me since I had everything on video and in text messages. The next day he handed me $900 all in $10 and $5 bills and walked off without saying a word. But here's the funny part. The $900 quote had gone up to over $1,000 because we'd waited too long and they were booked up. I called the original survey company back and told them we had settled our differences. I explained that he had paid me for the cost of the survey and I just wanted to get another one done. I asked if they could come out and do it, and they agreed to do it for the same $550. So I got my property properly surveyed twice. My neighbor paid $900 total when it only cost me $1,100, and I pocketed the extra $350. I used that money to put up a proper fence and plant trees along both sides of my yard. Based on all the furniture I see them hauling out lately, I'm pretty sure my entitled neighbors are moving soon. Good riddance. When my dad got diagnosed with cancer, I had to drop out of college to help take care of him and my younger sister while my mom worked double shifts at the hospital. The overnight roadside assistance job at an insurance company paid decent money and let me be home during the day when they needed me most. So there I was sitting in a dimly lit call center from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., helping stranded drivers across the country. Most nights were pretty routine. Dead batteries, flat tires, the occasional tow. People were usually grateful for the help even if they were frustrated about being stuck. But this one night changed everything. It was around 3 a.m. when my headset lit up with an incoming call from Phoenix. The woman on the other end sounded like she was having the worst night of her life. I answered professionally and asked how I could help her tonight. She told me she was locked out of her car and needed someone there right away. Her words were all slurred together, and I had to strain to understand what she was saying. I grabbed my notepad and tried to get the basics. I told her I was sorry to hear about her situation and asked for her location so I could send someone out to help. She seemed confused and asked if I was even listening to her, repeating that she was locked out. I explained that I understood her problem but needed to know where she was so I could dispatch a locksmith. She started rattling off an address, but between her slurred speech and what sounded like loud music in the background, I could barely make it out. I apologized and asked her to repeat the address, explaining that I wanted to make sure I had it right. That's when she got nasty. She asked if I was even from this country and said I couldn't understand English. That hit me right in the gut. I was born and raised in Alabama. And yeah, I have a thick southern accent, but I speak English just fine. I took a deep breath and told her politely that I was just trying to make sure I got the correct address for her. After going back and forth for another few minutes, I finally got her address written down, but I needed more details to give the locksmith accurate information. I asked if this was at a house, apartment complex, business, or what type of location. She snapped that it was obviously a house and called me stupid. I punched the address into Google Maps while she continued complaining. The little pin dropped right on top of what was clearly labeled as a dive bar called the Rusty Anchor. Well, that explained the background noise and her condition. I told her I was going to put her on hold for just a moment while I contacted our locksmith service. She warned me not to keep her waiting long. I muted the call and dialed our contracted locksmith company. The dispatcher there was really helpful and told me they could get someone out there, but it would take about 45 minutes since it was pretty late and that area was a bit of a drive from where their guy was. Honestly, 45 minutes seemed pretty reasonable for 3 a.m. service, especially since she was at a bar and not stranded on some dark highway. I got back on the line with her and gave her the good news that I had a locksmith who could be there in about 45 minutes. She exploded. She said she couldn't believe it would take 45 minutes and called the whole thing ridiculous. She said we were all useless. I tried to explain that considering the time and her location, that was actually pretty fast service. She demanded to know what was wrong with her location and told me not to give her attitude. Then she went on a rant that I won't repeat, but it involved more comments about my intelligence, my accent, and some really nasty assumptions about my background. I dealt with upset customers before, but this woman was something else entirely. She was mean, entitled, and clearly drunk. When I finally got her off the phone, I sat there for a minute just staring at my computer screen. Dad always taught me to turn the other cheek, but this woman had really gotten under my skin. Then I had an idea. I pulled up Google and searched for the Phoenix Police Department non-emergency number. My hands were shaking a little when I dialed. When the police dispatcher answered, I told them I worked for a roadside assistance company and had just taken a call from someone who was clearly intoxicated at the Rusty Anchor. I explained that she was locked out of her car and waiting for a locksmith, but I was concerned she might try to drive once she got back in. The dispatcher asked for the address and any other details, so I gave them everything I had. Part of me felt bad about it, but honestly, she'd been so nasty and was obviously planning to drive drunk. Someone needed to stop her before she hurt herself or someone else. About an hour later, my phone rang again. It was the locksmith calling to tell me something weird was happening. He said he was at the address I'd given him, and there were police cars everywhere. The woman who had called was getting arrested right at that moment. I asked what had happened, and he explained that when he got there, she was standing outside the bar screaming at everyone. When the cops showed up, she started yelling at them too. Her boyfriend or whoever was trying to calm her down, but she wasn't having any of it. They were putting her in the back of the patrol car right then. I could hear shouting and commotion in the background. The locksmith went on to tell me that the sober guy said they'd had a designated driver plan, but she got way too drunk and started causing problems inside the bar too. The bartender had actually called the cops before the locksmith even got there. I asked if he still needed to unlock the car, and he said no, the boyfriend had the spare key. He was just shaking his head and apologizing to everyone. The locksmith felt sorry for the guy. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and smiled a little. I wasn't proud of calling the police out of spite, but it turned out she really was causing problems everywhere she went that night. The bartender had already called them, so my call probably just sped things up. The rest of my shift was pretty quiet, just a couple of jump starts and one tow. But I kept thinking about that woman and wondering if she'd remember any of it in the morning. Probably not. When I got home that morning, Dad was already up making coffee like he always did, even though the chemo made him tired. He asked how work was, and I told him it had been an interesting night with a real piece of work for a customer. He reminded me of what he always said about difficult people, that they're usually fighting battles we don't know about. I finished his thought by saying that was right, but that doesn't mean you have to let them walk all over you either. He was right. Like usual, that woman might have been having a terrible night, but that didn't give her the right to be cruel to someone just trying to help her. And in the end, her own behavior is what got her arrested, not my phone call. The next week, I got called into my supervisor's office. I thought I was in trouble, but it turned out the locksmith had filed a report praising how I handled the situation. My call to the police had prevented what could have been a dangerous situation, since the woman had been trying to get her keys specifically so she could drive home drunk. My supervisor told me that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel good in the moment, but it was still the right thing. That night taught me that being professional doesn't mean being a doormat. You can help people and still protect yourself and others from their bad choices. Let me tell you about the most insane day I've ever had at my local Dunkin' Donuts. I've been going to this place since I was 18, and it holds a special place in my heart because it was actually my very first job when I turned 16. Back then, I was just a kid learning how to make coffee and deal with customers. Now I'm 28 and work for a woodworking company, or at least I did until the pandemic hit. When everything shut down, my woodworking business had to close temporarily. I found myself with nothing to do and nowhere to go. Since Dunkin' Donuts was still open and struggling with staff shortages, I decided to help out my old workplace. It was weird going from working with power tools and lumber all day to making lattes and glazing donuts. But I needed something to keep me busy, and my friends there needed the help. My best friend from high school actually owns this Dunkin' Donuts franchise now. He bought it a few years back when the previous owner retired. We've stayed close over the years, and he knew I was going through a rough patch with work. So when I offered to help out during the pandemic, he was more than happy to have me around. I've been doing this routine for about a week, helping behind the counter in the morning rush, then just hanging around the store afterward since I had nowhere else to be. The place had these comfortable lounge chairs in the lobby area where customers could sit and enjoy their coffee. After dealing with the breakfast crowd that particular morning, I was exhausted. The work was more draining than I remembered from my teenage years. I decided to take a break and sat down in one of the lounge chairs. I closed my eyes and tried to clear my head, maybe even meditate a little. I wasn't sleeping, just trying to relax and recharge before the lunch rush started. That's when she walked in. This woman had the classic entitled haircut. You know the one I'm talking about. Short, layered, and screaming, "I want to speak to your manager." She placed her order at the counter, got her coffee, and then for some reason decided I was her problem. She walked over to where I was sitting and stood right in front of me. She told me I couldn't be sleeping there and demanded that I leave. I opened my eyes and looked at her, completely confused about who this person thought she was. I asked her who she was to be telling me what to do. She just repeated her demand that I get out of the store. I told her no, I didn't have to leave. That's when she called me a homeless person and said homeless people weren't allowed in the store. That really got to me. I wasn't homeless, I was just helping out at a business where I used to work and my friend was the owner. I started to explain this to her, but she cut me off and called me a vagrant. Then she claimed she was dating the owner and threatened to call the police to have me removed. Now this was getting interesting. My best friend, the actual owner, was single and definitely not dating this woman, but I was curious to see how far she'd take this lie. I told her to go ahead and call them. Without missing a beat, she pulled out her phone and called 911. I couldn't believe someone would actually call emergency services over something so ridiculous. But there she was, talking to the dispatcher about a homeless person refusing to leave the store. A few minutes later, 2 police officers walked through the door. I wasn't worried because I knew I hadn't done anything wrong, but I was curious about how this would play out. That's when my friend, who had been watching this whole drama unfold from behind the counter, decided to have some fun. He's always been a bit of a troublemaker, and I could see that mischievous look in his eyes that I remembered from high school. He walked over to where we were all standing and looked directly at Karen. He announced loudly that he thought she was having delusions about the Dunkin property. She went from confident and demanding to confused and panicked in about 2 seconds. The police officers immediately turned their attention to her instead of me. One of the officers asked her if she was the person who called about a disturbance. She confirmed that she was and repeated her claim that I was a homeless man who wouldn't leave the store. The other officer asked her about her claim that she was dating the owner. My friend told the officers that he'd never seen this woman before in his life and that he definitely wasn't dating anyone right now. The officers started asking Karen more questions about why she thought she had authority to remove customers from the store. Her story kept changing and she was getting more flustered by the minute. One of the officers asked to see her identification. That's when things got really interesting. When Karen reached into her purse, she fumbled and several cards fell onto the floor. The officers helped her pick them up, but they noticed something odd. The second officer pointed out that she had multiple credit cards with different names on them. Karen claimed they weren't hers and that she was just holding them for friends. The officers exchanged a look and asked her to step outside for a moment. My friend and I watched through the window as they ran her information through their system. When they came back inside, one of the officers was holding handcuffs. He told Karen that she had an outstanding warrant for identity theft and that she was under arrest. The entire store went silent except for the sound of coffee machines. Everyone was staring as they read Karen her rights and put the handcuffs on her. Karen kept yelling that this was ridiculous and that she was dating the owner who would vouch for her. My friend repeated that he didn't know who she was. As they escorted her out of the store, she kept shouting about how this was all unfair and that she was going to sue everyone. The other customers started talking excitedly about what they had just witnessed. After the police left with Karen, my friend and I just looked at each other and started laughing. What had started as a quiet morning break had turned into the most entertaining thing either of us had experienced in months. My friend said that this was definitely going to be the story he'd tell at parties for the next 10 years. I told him I couldn't believe she had actually called the police on me for sitting in a chair. The rest of the day, customers kept coming in asking if we were the Dunkin' Donuts where that woman got arrested. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.